Good morning, everyone.
everyone.
Um, my
My
name
name
is
is
Janet
Janet
Mondi.
Mondi.
I
I
welcome
welcome
you
you
all
all
to
to
today's
today's
session
session
of
of
Hack365
Hack365
Global.
Global.
Today,
Today,
we'll be
we'll be
looking
looking
at
at
another
another
interesting
interesting topic,
topic, pond
pond
at the
at the
top,
top,
how
how
hackers
hackers
seize
seize
domain
domain
admin.
admin.
So
So
we are
we are
excited
excited
to
to
have
have
you
you
all
all
here today, both on
on
site
site
and
and
virtually
virtually
in every
every
other part
part
of the
of the
world.
world.
Today's
Today's
session
session
is
is
designed
designed
to
to
take you
go
beyond
beyond
theory
theory
like
like
we
we
usually
usually
do.
do.
It
It
is
is
designed
designed
to take you into the mind
mind
of the hacker
hacker
and
and
show
show
you
you
in
in
real
real
time
time
how
how
a
a
single
single
foothold
foothold
can
can
escalate
escalate
to
to
a
a
complete
complete
domain
domain
control.
control.
As
As
cybersecurity
cybersecurity
professionals
professionals
and
and enthusiasts,
enthusiasts, we
we
know
know
that
that
defending
defending
system
system
effectively
effectively
means
means
understanding
understanding
how
how
they
they
are
are attacked,
attacked. So
so
you
you
will
will
not
not
only
only
witness
witness
demonstration
demonstration
of
of
domain admin takeovers, you
you
will
will
also
also
gain hands-on
gain
insights, practical
practical
lab
lab
experiences, and
and
actionable
actionable
defense
defense strategies
strategies that
that
you
you
can
can
immediately
immediately
apply
apply
in your
in your
career,
career,
workplace,
workplace,
studies,
studies,
or
or
you
you
have
have
an
an
ongoing
ongoing
project.
project.
So I
So I
feel
feel
like
like
one or
one or
two
two
things that
things
you
that you
pick
pick
up
up
here
here
will
will
also
also
assist you in
do
that.
that.
So
So
we
we
advise you
advise you
to
to
get
get
ready, stay curious,
curious,
have your system set up, tell
tell
your
your
friend
friend,
to tell
tell
your
your
friend
friend,
to
connect
connect to
to
SciSec
Dissect
Academy
Academy YouTube
YouTube right
right
now.
now.
And
And
let's
let's
get
get
into
into
the
the
mind
mind
of
of
the attacker
attacker
and
and
learn
learn
how
how
to
to
stay
stay
ahead
ahead
of
of
them.
them.
Learn
Learn
how
how
to
to
always
always
be
be
ahead
ahead
of
of
the
the
hackers.
hackers.
If you
If you
have
have
any
any
questions,
questions,
please
please
note
note
them
them
down.
down.
At
At
the
the
end
end
of the
of
session, a
the
Q and A
Q&A
section
section
will
will
be
be
available,
available,
so
so
you
you
can
can
we will attend
attend
to
to
all
all
your
your
questions.
questions,
Whatever
whatever
you
you
need
need
to
to
know,
know.
we
We
will
will
provide
answer.
answers. So do
Do
not
not hesitate
hesitate to note down any questions you might have. Or
or
also,
also
if you
you
have
have not
not registered
registered
an
an
account
account
on
on
Hack365
Hack365
Global,
Global,
kindly
kindly
indicate
indicate
or
or
send
send
us
us
a
a
message
message
in the
in the
chat
chat
session.
section.
We
We
will
will
provide
provide
you
you
guidelines
guidelines
how
how
you
you can
can register
register
an
an account.
account. And
And
if you
if you
have
have
any
any
other
other
question,
questions,
you
you
can
can
join
join
our
our
youth WhatsApp
WhatsApp
community
community
where
where
you
you
can
can
interact
interact
with
with
like-minded
like-minded
people,
people,
where you
where you
can
can
also
also
get
get
timely
timely
updates
updates
on
on
our
our
next
next
topic.
topic.
So
So
once
once
again,
again,
we are
we are
excited
excited
for
for
today's
today's
section,
section
and
and
we can't
can't
wait
wait
for
for
you
you
to
to
experience
experience
what
what
it
it means
means to
to
stay
stay
ahead
ahead
of
of
an
an
hacker.
hacker.
So at
At
this
this
section,
session,
I
I
will be
will
handing over to your
be
today's
today's
instructor,
instructor,
Mr.
Mr. David
David Idowu.
Idowu.
So
So
bye
bye
for
for
now and enjoy your practical
now.
session.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Please, can you confirm if you can hear me? Can you hear me? And that's right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's session of our hands-on practical sessions. And for today's session, we're going to be looking at an introduction to Active Directory and how attackers are able to map domains. So basically, today is going to be more of an introductory course into concepts of Active Directory and how an Active Directory works, what an Active Directory is, how to set up one, and how an Active Directory works, and the setup procedure for. Okay. No problem. Can put it out. Can put it out a moment. And how attackers are able to map domains and how an active directory works basically. So for today's objectives, we want to understand what an active directory is, understand the methodology of setting up an active directory, understand policies and rules in an active directory. We also want to understand and set up an active directory. Now, by way of introduction, what is an active directory? An active directory is a directory service developed by Microsoft for Windows domain networks. It stores information about objects in a network, such as users, computers, printers, and other resources, and it organizes this information in a centralized hierarchical structure, provides authentication, authorization, and management services for enterprise network. So basically, an active directory is more like a sophisticated network infrastructure developed by Microsoft for Windows domain networks. Basically, a majority of the domain networks we have are majorly set up in Windows. So it's used to store this information about objects. Objects in the sense could be users, could be computers, could be anything. Anything can be an object. A user, Adam, can be an object. A printer can be an object. A computer can be an object. Even a file itself can also be an object. And then it organizes all of this information in a structured way such that it has hierarchy to all of these things. So a particular object can come before another object in terms of hierarchy, meaning it's above the one below, or you can have two similar objects with same privileges and same levels in the structure of the hierarchy. So basically, an Active Directory is like a digital phone book for your company. But then instead of phone numbers, it stores information about people, like we mentioned, objects. It stores this information about people, computers, and resources. It also decides who can log in, what they can access, and what rules apply to them. For example, you want to imagine a school and you have students, which of course are users. And then now that you have users, you have students, you have classrooms. The classrooms are simulating computers now. And so in an Active Directory, you have users and you have computers. And if you're going to typify these things, you want to typify them as students in a classroom. And then you also have rules in the classroom, such as no phones in class, do not make noise in class. These rules are called group policies. So Active Directory keeps all of this organized in one place. So all of this work together as a functional database. Another way to simulate this is to think of an Active Directory like the brain of a company's network. It stores and organizes everything the company needs to run its IT systems or its networking. You have people, it can be employees, students, or teachers. You also have computers, it can be office PCs, laptops, whatever the case can be. And you also have resources. Resources can be printers, shared folders, application, and whatnot. And instead of keeping this information scattered across individual computers, such that a particular computer is the only one that has access to a particular file and others can't have access to it, depending on the case scenario, an Active Directory puts all of this in one central place so that it can be managed easily and securely. Meaning, if you have access to an Active Directory as a user, you have access to the content of the Active Directory dependent on the role you have in the Active Directory. Now that we've defined what an Active Directory is, we want to know the purpose and the benefits of Active Directory. Now, an Active Directory exists to simplify and secure the management of resources within an organization. The main purposes of an Active Directory is one, centralized authentication. It means one set of credentials for access across the network, meaning a particular user logs in and he's in. He doesn't have to log in Take, for instance, in regular networking, the user can have um, credentials for, take for instance, SMB and not have credentials for SSH, and it's still the same user. And because of that, he might not have access to probably something that is secluded in a particular place or in a particular protocol. Now, but in an Active Directory, all you need is just one authentication, and then you have access to everything that belongs to you. Now, authorization and access control. This ensures that users can only access resources they are allowed to, which I mentioned before. So a user that is just a regular user, which is a low-level user, only has access to resources that he's allowed to because he's a low-level user. Group policy management. This allows administrators to enforce rules and configurations across many computers at the same time. Meaning, an admin can enforce a particular rule that cuts across everybody on the Active Directory or every computer at once. He doesn't have to modify it for each user or for a particular set of people. That's why they are called group policies, because it's a policy that can cut across everybody. Take, for instance, password length management. You want to you want to have a rule such that everybody's password must be a minimum of 10 lengths. That's a group policy. That's a group policy password policy that can be used. And if enforced, every user must have a password with a password length of 10. That's what group policy management is about. Also, scalability and flexibility. Active Directory supports large and distributed environments with multiple domains. So an Active Directory can become very thick in respect to its topology. It can become very, 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 very broad and very, very much distributed, as you can have what we call forests, multiple domains, trusted domains, and can even have multiple forests at the same time. So an Active Directory is endless, depending on the scenario. We also have central login systems, which is a single sign-on. So once a user logs in once and gets access to everything they're allowed to use, which was mentioned before. Simplified administrations. An IT can make changes from one central place instead of managing every computer separately. Meaning I can make changes to everybody's computer at once from the administrator. Or because I have more privileges than every other person under me, I can just enforce a change to every other person that I have control over. Also, security controls. Rules like password complexity or blocking USB drives can be applied to all computers automatically. This reverts back to the group policy management, which was discussed before. Then we'll talk about scalability, which works for small companies and also for enterprises with hundreds of thousands of users. So for an example, a company with 5,000 employees doesn't want IT to visit every computer to add a new user to their particular database. So with an Active Directory, once you add a particular user to the Active Directory, everything works automatically. Now, without an Active Directory, every computer is going to be on its own. Users would have separate logins, and IT admins would have to configure every single computer one by one because every computer is on its own. Point in case, in a regular network, in networking, you have cases where you have peer-to-peer connections, whatever type of networking system you're using. But it still does not neglect the fact that every computer is on its own and every computer has to be configured one by one. Now, but in an Active Directory, you don't have to do that anymore because it works automatically. All you just need is to be an administrator or you call it domain controller. And then the administrator in the Active Directory has the ability to perform actions that cut across everybody in the whole network. Now, with an Active Directory, one username and password works everywhere in the network. Meaning, as an Active Directory user, once you're a user in an Active Directory, you log in, it's more like you are in your own system. And then you have access to do everything everywhere in the network. So it's called a single sign-on. Now, IT experts can apply rules like password complexity or software installation from one central place. So it makes life easier for both the users and the administrators. For example, like a school principal who can announce new rules to the whole school over a PA system instead of visiting every class. That's what an Active Directory is. All he just needs is to make the announcement from one point, and everybody gets it. Now, so we'll move to the architecture of an Active Directory. Now, in respect to architecture, an Active Directory has three major things. One, which is called a forest. Now, a forest is the highest level container in an Active Directory. It represents the entire instance of an Active Directory. It defines a security boundary and can contain multiple domains. So, you know, the way you have an actual forest in agriculture that is a collection of multiple trees, animals, and whatever the case is. That's how a forest is also here in an Active Directory. Now look at a domain. A domain is a logical grouping of objects, such as users, computers, and groups that share the same database and security policies. So domain apple.com, all that pertains to apple.com is in the domain. And then we have a tree, which is a hierarchical arrangement of one or more domains that contain or that share a contiguous namespace. Now, to further explain this, domain is the basic building block, the basic building and everything you see. A domain is more like one school campus that has its own students, its own lecturers, teachers and rules. We call them, I think you can call it a faculty. You have a faculty of management science, or a college of engineering, or a college of natural and applied sciences. That's a domain. Now, a tree is a group of related domains with a common name structure. So it's like all schools in one city. So you have multiple colleges, you have multiple faculties. Now, what is a forest? The forest is the top level containing one or more trees, like the entire school system across the country. So each level helps to organize resources logically and securely. Now, we have here that a forest is a single instance of an Active Directory. It is basically a collection of domain controllers that trust one another. Now, a domain controller is more or less an administrator in a domain, hence the name domain controller. Now, domains could be containers within the scope of a forest. Of course, a domain is part of a forest. Now, an organizational unit, popularly called OUs, are logical groupings of users, computers, and other resources. Most times, a group of users can be called an organizational unit. Group of computers, printers, files can also form an organizational unit. Group is a collection of users or other groups, can either be privileged users or non-privileged users. Now, domain controllers and the global catalog. Now, a domain controller is a Windows server that stores a copy of the Active Directory's database. Take, for instance, the ntds.dit and handles authentication and directory queries. So a domain controller is the actual server that stores the Active Directory's database and handles both authentication, authorization, and everything that pertains to the Active Directory. Now, a global catalog is a distributed data repository that contains a partial or a read-only copy of all objects in the forest, used for speeding up searches and logins across domains. So a domain controller is a special server that is running the Active Directory itself. It stores the Active Directory database, all of the information about the users, computers, and the roles, and also authenticates users when they log in, checks if their username and their password is correct. For example, the domain controller is like the school office, where you check your ID card before you enter the campus. Now, in an Active Directory, there's something called replication. Replication is the process by which changes made on one domain or one domain controller are automatically copied to other domain controllers to ensure consistency across the network. There's a possibility to have multiple domain controllers in a particular forest, in a particular Active Directory. And there's something called multi-master replication, meaning any domain controller can make changes and updates flow to all the other domain controllers. There is also something called site-to-site links, which is used to optimize replication across different physical locations. Basically, replication just means copying updates from one domain controller to others so that they can all stay in sync. For example, if you change your password on one campus, replication makes sure that other campuses know that your password has been changed, basically. Now, here is more like a chart to explain all that we've been doing since, or basically explain the components of an Active Directory. Now, first things first, we want logical components, and for each logical component, it has its physical components that applies to it. Now you have sites. Now, when you think of sites, in an Active Directory, look at them as collection of users, groups, and computers that are physically available. Now, for the physical component that matches up to this, we have the domain controller, which copies or contains an entire copy of the Active Directory itself. Now, an OU, which is the organizational unit, is available for better management and to organize secureable objects. The physical component for this is the read-only domain controller, which also contains a copy of the Active Directory. But you can see it as a more detailed version of the domain controller. Of course, it's read-only. So the part of the domain controller that gives you access to all of the users on the GC and everything is what is known as the read-only domain controller. Now, for the schema is a list of attributes of an secureable object present in an Active Directory, something that is secured, or list of privileges, list of actions that can be taken on a particular object. The same way in Linux, when you're working on a particular file and check for the privileges that can tell you whether a file is readable or writable. A schema is the provision for that in an AD. And for the physical components, we have the global catalog, which is the read-only copy of all the domain naming context in the folder, in the forest. It's used for boosting up your searches in a domain. Now we have partitions, which explains the application directories, configuration directories, and whatnot. And for physical components, we have the data store, which is present on each server. Stores the Active Directories database information. And then we have the domain trees, which is a collection of domain controllers that share a common root domain. We have a domain itself, which is an administrative boundary for users and servers. Forest, which depicts collections of domains sharing a common Active Directory database. Now, before we move on, any question? And also from the online participants, any questions? Now we'll move on to LDAP, Kerberos, and DNS in Active Directory. Now this is more like a walk into authentication and authorization in Active Directory. The LDAP is the protocol used to query and modify directory services. LDAP, which is a short form for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol, is a protocol that is used to query and modify directory services. Kerberos is the default authentication protocol in an Active Directory that uses encrypted tickets instead of passwords for secure access. Then we are aware of what DNS is, regular domain name service, that it provides name resolution so clients can locate domain controllers services in the network. So think of it like this. LDAP is more like the language that you use to speak in an Active Directory. It's the language you use to communicate, to access the content of an Active Directory. Now, Kerberos. Kerberos is more like an authentication, is the authentication mechanism that is used in an Active Directory. So under Kerberos, we have something called ticketing. So basically, in an Active Directory for authentication, we use tickets. The reason is because we believe tickets are more secure than regular passwords. So when you also log into an Active Directory, you send a ticket, and then there is a server, the Kerberos server, that authenticates, and that's what makes the domain controller log you in to your own account that has your own level of privilege. So that procedure is called Kerberosing, because here we use tickets. We don't use passwords because we believe these are more secure. I mean, for authentication, you're either using passwords or you're using cookies. For an Active Directory, we use tickets. And for tickets, we have two different types of tickets, but that's a bit more advanced. And then for domain name system, we also have the domain name system, which provides name resolution so that clients can locate the DCs and services in the network. So for most times, a domain controller has two network adapters, one which connects it to the internet, and a static adapter that is used by internal machines to connect to it. That way, the internal machines have access to the content of the domain controller, and the domain controller has access to the internet. But the DNS is more like the GPS for computers. It tells them where to find the domain controller. LDAP is the protocol used to ask the directory for information, and Kerberos is the security guard that gives you a ticket to access resources securely after you log in. So basically, LDAP is the language used to talk to the directory. Kerberos is the secure ID card system for proving identity. DNS is the map that shows where everything is located. Now, move to objects and organizational structures. Now, in an Active Directory, an object is any resource in an Active Directory that is represented by a record in the directory database. The example of a common object includes a user object, which represents a person who can log onto the network. Computer objects represent a machine that is joined to the domain. A group object, which is a collection of users or computers for simplified access control. An organizational unit, which are containers that are used to organize objects and apply group policies. Sorry, I need to bring that keyboard. Okay, so objects are the things stored in an Active Directory. Common objects include users, people who can log in, which are the students, teachers, computers, which are the machines connected to the network, and groups, collection of users, computers for easier permission management. Then organizational units are folders that help to organize everything neatly. We think of organizational units like departments in a school. The same way you have a science department, an arts department, or a sports department, all of which have their own students and their own teachers. Now move to schema and attributes. The schema is the set of rules in Active Directory that define the types of objects and their attributes. Attributes are characteristics assigned to objects. For example, a user object has the attributes like name, email, and its department. The schema is the blueprint for what can be stored in an Active Directory, what kind of objects exist in an Active Directory, like the user there, and what information they can have, like name or email. And then the attributes is the actual detail for a user. Attributes like their username, their phone number, and their job title. The schema is like a blueprint or a grammar for the directory, while attributes are the properties of each of those items. Now, security and access control. So look at authentication versus authorization. Authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user or a system. For example, entering a username and a password. Authorization is the process of determining what actions or resources the authenticated user is allowed to access. More like showing your ID card at the gate. That's authorization. So that authentication, show your ID card at the gate. Then authorization determines the class you can go to. Then now look at access control lists and permissions. Okay. So look at access control lists and permissions. An access control list is a set of rules attached to an object that defines which users or groups have permissions to access it and what actions they can perform. Access control list is like a guest list for each resource. It lists who can access it and what they can do, read, write, or delete. Group policies, group policy objects. A group policy object is a collection of configuration settings applied to computers or users in a domain. GPOs allow administrators to perform one action, and this action spreads across everybody on the particular domain, such as enforcing password policies, deploying softwares, restricting user actions, and configuring system settings. So there are a set of rules that apply to users and computers in the domain. They control things like software installation, desktop wallpaper, security settings. For example, a group policy object is more like when there is a rule in a particular school, such as no phones in class or library closes by 6 p.m. That rule enforces throughout everybody in the school. That is called a group policy object. In an Active Directory, take for instance, the rule is set that for every user that's supposed to log in, you find some infrastructures that are configured in such a way that there is a required password length. You see things like password length must not be less than 8 characters. That's a group policy object being implemented there. It's called a password policy that cut across everybody on the particular domain. Now, so we'll look at privilege groups and privileges that they have. Now, a domain admin. Who is a domain admin? A domain admin is someone that has administrative access to all the resources in a domain. An enterprise admin is also called a domain admin, exists only in the forest root and is already added to the group of domain admin of every child. Now we also have something called built-in administrators. It's a group called the local group, and it's also called the built-in administrators. So they are the local administrator on a domain controller, more like the local admin on a domain controller. Now, another group we want to take note of is the server operators, or are the server operators, and they have the capability to administer the domain server. We also want to look at the account operators that they have the privilege to manage any user not in a privileged group. And finally, we look at administration and delegation, and some of the roles in an Active Directory. An enterprise admin has full control over the entire forest. A domain admin has full control over a single domain. Remember, a forest is a collection of several domains. So a schema admin has control over schema mods, schema modification, and then another role is a role called delegation, which involves assigning specific admin tasks to specific users without giving full control. Take, for instance, a user A can have generic rights over user B, meaning he has the ability to change user B's password, but he doesn't have full control over user B, but he has that privilege. So that is called delegation. You are delegating a task to a particular user. And look at finally some administrative tools which are called Active Directory users and computers, the ADUC. And we have GUI tools for managing users, groups, and OUs, such as Bloodhound and the likes, Bloodhound, Sharphound, and the likes. We have PowerShell for Active Directories, which is a command line tool for automation. For example, new add user, you want to add a new user, get AD group member, you want to add a group member, and case in point. We'll move on to the practical session on Hack365 Global, and there we have an Active Directory room, which would guide us on next steps to take. And so before we move on to that, we'll have a room for questions and yes, questions on what has been discussed so far. Hack365 Global.com. Then we move on to our Active Directory room. We have the AD room right here. And okay. So right here it says an Active Directory is the backbone for almost every corporate network. It manages users, computers, resources, security policies, and access control from a central point for defenders. For defenders, Active Directory is a powerful tool to secure systems. For attackers, compromising an Active Directory means gaining full control of the entire network. This is because an Active Directory is more of a sophisticated system than a regular network. So majority or modern companies now prefer to use Active Directories than using regular networkings that we are all familiar with. Take for instance, you have a peer-to-peer connection, or you have a topology and whatever scenario you have in your organization. The former way of carrying out tests and attacks was to compromise a user account or find an open port on a particular network. Take, for instance, SMB that is running probably a particular version that is outdated or whatever the case is. And then that serves as a way for me to compromise the entire system. And then that way, if I can launch an exploit, I have control into the system. But then in an Active Directory, it doesn't work that way anymore because gaining access to an Active Directory means you gain access to a user account. And gaining access to a user account doesn't necessarily mean you've compromised the system or you've compromised the network. So For red teamers and attackers or hackers, the only way an Active Directory can be successfully compromised is if you're able to take over the domain controller. So the exercise doesn't stop from gaining a user account. There's a possibility for you to always gain a lower level user account. The idea is for you to become the domain controller. Only then can you say you've been able to compromise the entire network or the entire system. So that
So
sophistication,
it's been recording
modern
since, but
companies and systems
I
have
was
been
not
using
there.
Active Directories to store informations and the likes. So what is an AD? An AD is a digital address book plus security guard for
So how do I
organizations.
get it back on
It stores
YouTube
information
like
about
this?
users, computers,
It's on
printers,
you.
and
Yeah,
resources,
I don't know
ensuring that
where I
everyone
am.
has access to the right things,
It
right
is,
information
but
about.
what if people are
That
dropping
doesn't
chat
matter
and
in
I'm not seeing
cybersecurity. If
it?
attackers gain control of an Active Directory, they essentially own the entire network. User data, servers, emails,
As
and
in,
everything.
this whole thing is just stressing me. We are doing just fine
For
until the
analogy's
light
sake, if
went
we do,
off.
the principal's office keep all of the students and teachers' records. He decides who can enter which classroom. The person steals the
I
sheets
don't know
past
what
the
happened though.
entire school.
I
So
don't know
some
what
of the
happened today. Like, I
we have
can't even tell.
the name for the entire network, like the name of the school, for example, mycompany.local. First, the collection of multiple domains, like a university with many schools. A tree, a family of related domains within the forest, like schools under one district. Object, every user, every printer, every group in an Active Directory is an object. Organizational units, folders in an Active Directory that help organize objects by department, location, or by their roles. Some of the core components of an Active Directory involve one, the domain controller, which is the brain of the Active Directory. Without domain controllers, logins are going to fail, resources are going to become inaccessible, and the network grinds to a halt. An Active Directory
I'm
database,
tired.
the NTDS, for example, NTDS DIT, is the central storage file holding all of the Active Directory data, like the master record book. The global catalog plays a special role on a domain controller that works like a search engine across the entire forest to quickly find and automate processes and objects. Sites and subnets help the Active Directory understand physical office locations so users can log into the nearest DC, improving speed and reliability. Active Directory authentication and security works like a ticket system. So you log in once, you get a ticket, and use it to access resources without re-entering your password. NTLM and older, less secure authentication method, still allowed for compatibility but targeted by attackers. Single sign-ons, popularly known as the SSO. One login gives you access to everything you're allowed to use, more like a VIP pass for the whole network. An Active Directory user and group management represents real people and service accounts for applications. Groups are a collection of users for easier management. Security groups control access to files,
Not yet.
printers, and systems. Distribution groups are used for filling group emails. Group policy objects
Have you seen it
are
at
rule
your
books
end?
that are applied to users and computers, for example, enforcing password complexities, swing lock timers, or software restrictions. Active Directory replication and trust ensures that every domain controller in the domain has the same up-to-date data, like photocopying the record book for backup purposes. Trust is a connection that let different domains share access, like alliances between schools so students can use each other's libraries. So when they say two domains are trusted domains, it means that they share access and they share alliance between the contents of each other, basically. So for security concepts in Active Directory include the least privilege and principle, meaning users only get what they need, nothing more than that. Admin tiers, um, high-level admin accounts displays from normal users to reduce the risk of privilege escalation. Attack paths. Hackers often start with low-level accounts and use misconfigurations to climb up to domain admin ranks. So some of the attacks you find in an Active Directory include password spraying, trying common passwords across many accounts. That's more like for initial access techniques. Pass the hash, using stolen password hashes to log in without knowing the actual password. Tools like CrackMap, exec, and NXC allows you to perform pass the hash majority of the times when you can just use the hashes itself to log in. Also, remote access services such as Evil, WinRM have the ability to allow an attacker to gain access to a system without actually knowing the actual password, but just finding the hash alone. Then golden ticketing, meaning forging Kerberos tickets for limited control over the domain. And we have Active Directory defense and hardening. Multi-factor authentication, this adds extra security layers beyond passwords. Regular patching and monitoring, this keeps the systems updated and tracks suspicious activities. Shared admin access, it splits the admin roles to limit damage if one account is compromised. Advanced threat detection tools like Microsoft Defender or SIEM solutions help spot attacks early. Real-world analogies recap, spoken about principles of faith, university, school, classroom folder, rulebook. Trust, which depicts alliances between schools. And then now we have a hands-on exercise. It says, set up an Active Directory environment in your home lab, install a Windows server, promote the server to a domain controller, create a domain, for example, hacklab.local, add at least 2 users and 1 organizational unit, add a group, apply a group policy, take note of which step. You will use this in later challenges. Okay, so we'll just complete this lab and that will be all for this session. For this, first things first, we would have to go into our virtual box and right in our virtual box. And this is okay. This will just start our Windows server. Wait for our Windows server to boot. And then we just and then upon starting your Windows server, of course, you have to log in with the password you created as an administrator, and then just now the first thing you want to do when creating your Active Directory or when setting up your Active Directory, you want to check your Windows server. You want to check for networking, and you want to have an adapter. You want to have 2 adapters. The first one here should most likely be either your network address translation adapter or your bridged adapter. This is for internet access. Then the second one should be the internal network. And this is because this is going to be acting as your domain controller. And remember, we mentioned that the domain controller needs to have access to the internet, and at the same time, um, at the same time, have a way for users to connect to itself also at the same time. So upon doing that, your server always spins up the dashboard for you for what you want to do. So first things first, we could just go to our command line and check for the adapters here and just type in ipconfig. So we see that we have um, two network adapters currently. We have the first one with the IP address 10.0.2.15, and we also have the second one here. This does not have an IP address assigned to it. This most likely happens to be a DHCP. This most likely happens to use DHCP, which happens to be the first one. What we could just do is to check our control panel, and if we go to network, the network sharing insurance center, we click on the change adapter settings. So we have a second one here, which happens to be unidentified. So we could just click on the properties, and then click on the IP Internet Protocol version for the IPv4, and then let's take a look at what is there. So we need to set a static IP address for the we need to set a static IP address for this particular domain controller for users to connect to it. So we could just use the 172.27.0.1. And for the subnet mask, we want to leave it at 255.255.0.1. Now, gateway, you want to leave your gateway most likely as it is. You want to leave your gateway most likely as it is, or you could just use 1.1.1.1. Now, for DNS, most times you want to set up your domain controller because it uses DHCP. It automatically maps the DNS to itself. So because of that, we would most likely would use a loopback address dot 0.0.1, and then once this is done, 0. Oh, sorry. Um, I think it should be on right now. Well, just a short recap of all that I've been doing for the time the audio has been off. So first things first, we spun up the Windows server and then we set up a static IP address for its second adapter. After doing that, the next thing we did was to change the name of our machine to domain controller settings. Then we renamed the machine and then we installed the Active Directory service itself. Now, upon installing the Active Directory service itself, the next thing we went ahead to do, which we are currently doing right now, is to promote this server to a domain controller. So, meaning upon promotion to a domain controller, this now has the ability to create users on its particular domain using the name of the domain we gave it, which happens to be mydomain.com. That's currently what we are doing right now. We're waiting for the installation to wrap up. Mm, mm. Okay, so I think the installation is successful and it tells me that we're about to be signed out. This is because Active Directory domain services was installed or removed. So we'll do that. So that just works automatically and I believe that's the automatic restart it has. So we just allow the server reboot. Okay. Okay. It's taking more time than normal. Right, if you have room for questions, please ask your questions right now. And ask your questions and get to it. Mm. It's taking so much time. Mm. Just cover this off. Cover it back on. Okay. Great. Visual. Great. Mhm. Okay. Right, it's open now. So just routine. And if you can notice, we now have our domain controller on this server. As you can see, it's now my domain / administrator, no longer just administrator. This is because we've promoted this particular server to become a domain controller. So what we'll just do now is to log in and create users and then yes, create users, possible create organizational units and would call it day. So all right, so after this has been done, so, so now I want to create users and we can just easily do that by you go down under the Windows administrative tools, you should see everything on the Active Directory. So we see Active Administrative Center, Active Directory Domains and Trust, Active Directory Module for Windows PowerShell, Active Directory Sites and Services. All of this was discussed in the theoretical session, but I want to go to the Active Directory users and computers. And here, we should be able to make a number of users. As you can see, our domain is right there. You can see it's mydomain.com. So we just right click and set a new. And what we want to do here is create a new user. So let's say we create a user Joe, and his name is Smith. His login name should be Joe. So his login name is going to be joe@mydomain.com because he is on this domain. So we'll click on next and we set a password for him. And we could just use password. And you see, we have quite a number of criteria that we can give user Joe, which could be either he must change his password on his next login, or he cannot change his password, or his password never expires, or his account is going to be disabled. All of this can be made on behalf of Joe. And it says when you click finish, the following object will be created. The full name, Joe Smith. His login name is going to be joe@domain.com, and the user must change. Let's uncheck this first. Yes, finish. Says Windows cannot set the password for Joe Smith because the password does not meet the password policy requirements. So this poses a hint that there is currently a GPU in check or in place for most likely a password strength or a password complexity. A password complexity rule that is currently in place. So, I mean, we use a simple password. So maybe we'll just make it a little bit complex. Click next. Okay, yes. So we created user Joe. We can, create another user. Let's say Alice or Bob. Last name Mike, and his name here is going to be Bob. Password, you can just use the same password. We're just trying to set up. So we have two users, Bob Mike and Joe Smith, currently on the Active Directory. Then what else were we asked to do? One organizational unit. So we can just add an organizational unit the same way we add. We can just create an organizational unit. We could say corporate. We call them corporate members. And yes, so this is an organizational unit called corporate members. So in the organizational unit, we could have new users in the organizational unit, new whatever the case happens to be. Right here, what we have here are users on the domain centrally. We can narrow it down to an organizational unit such that we have whatever the case it is we want to have inside of the organizational unit. Yeah, and then add a policy, a group policy. Okay. For that, in order for us to add a group policy, we will just go to the group policy management. And as you can see, we currently have a forest, which happens to be our domain controller, which is mydomain.com. So click on that, and under domains, we'll click on my domain, and it says create a GPO, which is a group policy object, and link it here. So we're going to be making a new group policy or whatever the case is. we call this password policy. We call this a password policy, and then if we click on this, see that the password policy, this has been created already. So we could edit the password policy itself, and we could set, a new user policy for this. Let's say we'll click on Windows settings. Just find one of the policies we can implement. The security policies here, software restriction policy, public key policies. What is in here? Okay, all of this. There is one. Of scripts. So there is the policy here. Okay. Yeah. For this reference. All right. So yeah. So questions and more questions. In the absence of no questions, this call it a day from here. Then we'll see you guys next time next week. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Thank you for tuning into our channel today for one at the top section. Please, if you have a question or you need further inquiry, kindly drop it at the WhatsApp platform. And if you're not there, you can drop a message at the chat section. So we will take it up from there. If you have any inquiry, you have further questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. If you have issues with creating an account at the Hack365 Global, kindly reach out to us as well. And also, there is room for structured learning experience. If you want to take a step further and you want to have a more personal experience, you can as well reach out to us for that. So that brings us to the end of today's section. We look forward to seeing you all next week, and thank you for always tuning in. Bye.